thank you, the iceberg.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks today. Nice seeing familiar faces. Guys, my name is Tabe Renechi Wunguru. I'm from Modena, AC. I've got an architectural background. I've been working in this space, I think from 2010, right? So we worked in I've done a lot of digital delivery projects. We've seen a lot of issues. We've picked up where the gaps are. We tried to push out the solutions. But in today's talk, I just want to give you guys the bigger picture. Like Khaled said, the iceberg, why we do this, how we should be doing this, and the intention for actually having an information model, right? Yeah, let me just get into it. Okay, I was told not to rush. I'm used to doing a 20-minute chat, so I'll take my time. Okay, I'll try to be interactive, right? And there's no time for Q&A, is it?
We'll see how you do.
Depends on how fast I talk, yeah. Right, so what many people think BIM is, like Khaled mentioned earlier, it's the actual model, right? And I sort of blame, you didn't hear this from me, right, those areas. I blame the vendors, right, the people that sell the software, right? When we got into, I studied architecture, it all started off on a drawing board, moved on to AutoCAD, and Revit popped up. And everyone was excited to create this Revit model, 3D model. When you create a floor plan, it creates sections, elevations, and that whole beast just blew up, right? The industry just started asking for Revit models, Revit models, Revit models. People started buying licenses, clients started saying, I need to own my 3D model, but they wouldn't do anything with it, right? And the reason behind it is how BIM was actually introduced to our industry as a built environment, right? We never really focused on the 90% part of BIM, which is the information management of it. And what does that information management entail? It entails the requirements that are needed for the model or for the information, who's responsible for the information, what standards you're using, what quality the information needs to be, and who makes the decisions on those models, on that information as well. Right, so on a high level, right, I won't just be talking about clash detection. I think there's no clash detection in today's talk. There's no renders, there's no 4D simulation, no digital twins, purely about the information and why we create the information behind the BIM model. We're still together? Awesome. Okay. Right, so just quickly by show of hand, right, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Just indicate to me what you think BIM is. Right, first one, a beautiful coordinated model, right, with outdated revisions. Okay, so there's no wrong answer. Okay. A basic model links to an approved construction and asset data. 3 people, okay? Sorry. A clash report, right? So you guys haven't seen it, with no assigned responsibilities, obviously not. A structured common data environment. Let me use Dropbox now, or Google Drive, right? With controlled reviews and authorized information. No. A digital twin with no defined operational user or decisions. Right. So obviously, none of these here create a full information model, right? And we'll hopefully by the end of this, you'll understand what BIM is and what it entails, right? If we look up here, what information is missing in this? Let me just show you guys. This is a point cloud scan, right, with piping models in. It's not even a Revit model, right? And here, obviously, there's coordination that still needed to get done. There's just a still image. And typically what we find in the industry, guys still receive PDFs. There's a lot of stuff that still needs to go into just one of those pipes with a laser. Like installing that little pipe there, all this information needs to be part of that little item in there. Right. So I'll hopefully help you guys to get to that. Okay. Right. So typically, when we're working in a project, clients will say, guys, please model, I want to see everything. Who's ever heard of LOD, 500, 300, level of development? Have you guys heard of those terminologies? Crazy. What's here? Okay. So typically, clients are like, I want a full-on 3D model, a digital twin. Whatever you build on site, I want to be able to walk around with VR glasses, etc., etc. Then get into industry, they force you to model all the brackets, every single little detail to the T. We actually have a client who's working on a project that's a very high level of information that's needed, very high level of development. This, I won't mention names, right? The specific firm is working on hotels, right? And the client wants to track everything. I think I feel you do know that, right? The interior designers ended up modeling in a cabinet the coffee machine with the pots, the cups, and the spoons, and including the slippers in the rooms as well, because the client wanted to see it in the renders, right? But that's what's happening in the industry. Everyone wants to see everything, right? But what we need to ask ourselves to make better decisions is who needs the information that we're creating, and what will that information support in decision making, right? What will it cost to create and maintain that information, and in what format does that information need to be shared with the people that will be operating the building, right? So the idea here is the use of a shared digital representation of a built asset to facilitate design, right, construction, and operation processes to form a reliable basis for decisions, right? And I'll just take you guys through the different project stages. I'm not going to talk about stage 1 to stage 6, typically what happens in a project, in a setup, right? Initially, when a project starts off, the client will come through, they'll identify a piece of land, they want to put up an asset or invest in a building, and they need to decide if they can proceed with a specific project, right? There are tools that allow you in the industry to conceptualize at an early stage, do proper value engineering, and create concepts with information in them, right? From there, it typically comes to the architect, right? We put together a concept, right? And we work out which option will perform best, okay? And then from there, we go into design space, and then we start doing the design, the coordinating all the different disciplines in a project, right? What typically happens at this stage, still a little bit backwards, right? We go into tendering stage, right? What should be procured, right? So the project gets costed, right? Make sure that it meets the budget, etc., right? And then from there, it gets authorized, goes on to construction, right? And then obviously installation, has it been installed correctly? And then the project gets commissioned out and handed over to the client, right? You guys can see how many decision stages there are in a project, right? It's not typically design me a 4-bedroom house, give me a model in 3 weeks, drawings, print out PDFs, get it approved, and build it. There's a lot of steps that go into getting a project out, right? So if we have poor information at any of these gates, we'll have delays, which happens, obviously, rework, a lot of claims, cost growth, safety risk, and obviously operational uncertainty, right? And unfortunately, the industry currently, specifically, we are on the claims part, right? If your strategy, concept, design, procurement, and construction, when you get to this stage and your information is not clear, the client suffers a lot of what we call variation orders and change orders on site, right? I had a client from my past experience just before COVID. They were doing social housing, right? When they started off, they would do like 2-story social housing building, right? And easy designs, right? There's no just single set of staircases, right? And then they got a big contract to do a 5-story walk up, right? Now this architect thought it would be okay to just take the 2 floors. It's a BIM model, right? 2 floors, and then just copy up 2 levels, and then issue that for construction. Right, when they got to site, I think the variation order book got up to around 17.5 million rand, additional to the cost of the project, because they didn't follow the correct gates and make sure that the design meets the initial strategies that the client required. Are we still together? Right? So the right question to ask is not what can we model. You can basically model anything. Guys have created elephants and stuff in Revit, right? Today you can literally take an image, put up your Claude tool, and tell Claude to model that image in Revit for you. You can model anything, right? But the right question that you need to be asking is, what decision must be made, by who, by when, and what information does it require? Am I 36 minutes in? Okay, cool. Right, and that flow of information, just to assist you guys, is when a decision is made, what information is required for that decision, how do we produce that information, how do we validate that information that was produced, and how do we exchange it, use it, obviously for our initial outcome. We're still together? Okay. And I'm intentionally not using the terminologies and stuff that we use in industry, just to try and make it relevant for everyone else. Okay. Right, so I didn't put up good numbers. Typically, what we receive in the industry now, we receive a scan like I showed you earlier, or a 3D object. It will have the correct shape, correct size, correct position, but nothing to identify, certify, or inspect or maintain it, right? What looks good, when BIM looks good, when information looks good in a model, it should have an asset ID or a barcode, I could say, to make it simple, in the BIM model and also on site, okay? You should have information like fire rating classifications, who manufactured it, inspection statuses, where the equipment is in the building, etc., etc. Right. This makes it easier for operating the building, right? Just to give you a little fact quickly. In a project, let's say we're doing a project for like 100 million rand, right? Out of that 100 million rand investment, I'm going to possibly like around 20% of it goes to design and construction. 75 to 80% of that budget goes to operating the building, right? And typically when we work in industry, we don't think about how will this person run this building, right? Currently what happens if an AECO goes bust, right? FM guys would have to go into their books, find the drawing, find the information, find out who installed it, when it was lost, servers, etc., 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 which costs a lot of money, right? And this problem still runs and still happens currently in the industry. We are assisting another client. I'm really trying to not say names, Tash. But they got a building 25 years ago, right? Beautiful project in Pretoria. They had a operator, facility manager running the building for 25 years. Their contract ended and they needed to hand it over to the next operator for the next 25 years of the building. The client has had to strip down the building, reinstall new interiors, new equipment for them to have accurate information, because the previous operator didn't have information. When there's something that's going wrong, we'll create a ticket, person call out to come out, fix the AECO, it's fixed, it's working, and then move on. But there was no proper record keeping or BIM model that could show them how their asset is performing as well, right? So basically, a model is one information container, right? With all those little stuff around it, okay? And BIM itself becomes a connected management system for that information, right? So we able to, with BIM, like assist with the purpose. We're able to assist with why the information is created. We're able to assist people to deliver the work, the processes, information, and the technology, right? Okay, let me just expand a bit on this. Okay. Time is flying, dude.
No, don't worry. That's
Cool.
previously.
Right, so feel like I'm repeating myself. So the on the purpose side of things is why is the information needed, right? On the people side of things, who requires information, who's going to produce the information, typically it's us in this room, who checks the information, who approves it and uses it, right? So we make use of BIM or information model to manage that whole process, okay? And the process itself, how does it move through from being created, reviewed, and authorized, right? And what geometry, data, documents, and evidence are required in the building information model. Very important, which systems or technology support that whole process, right? And then we have governance, which we will talk about, the ISO standards or the SANS 19650 standards. And typically this is what gets involved when it gets to building information model, right? So in an office, right, and you're working on a project, right? So in practice, well, we use Autodesk. Autodesk is quite popular in the industry, right? So I'm using an Autodesk example here as well as a common data environment, right? I spoke about this, right? But for each one of these different stages, right, you set up a project in, let me just bring that up. So for the requirement side, right, my other pet hate. Okay, a lot of people get into a project or you'll sit in an office and you'll start off architectural project, and typically the first thing people ask for is a BIM execution plan, right? My opinion on that, a BIM execution plan is it's right in the end of putting together this whole entire strategy. Just to help you out, you see that little EIR thing there? And EIR is an employer's information requirement. So a client, Tammy will be building a 10-story office building. She'll tell us what she needs in that asset and what she will be tracking and how she needs that information, right? A BIM execution plan is what the professional team itself would create to basically communicate how they would be delivering the information back to the client. Right. So when you get into a project, I'll show you a bit later as well. If you only have a BIM execution plan and no context of what that BIM execution plan actually talks back to, the process is already done, right? So my own opinion, you can't have a project with just a BIM execution plan, because who are you delivering to and what are you delivering and for what reason? Right. I've got it to a point now, if there's a project that just has a BIM execution plan and the client hasn't actually communicated what they want delivered at the end of the project, I tell the clients, don't get involved. I don't know what to deliver. Right? I get architects telling a client, here's a BIM execution plan. This is how we're going to do it. And that BIM execution plan never gets used. Right? An execution plan is literally just an implementation plan. This is how we're going to deliver your project. Okay, right, but what am I delivering? If you haven't told me what I want, or what you want from it, basically, right? There's different tools in Autodesk that we use for authoring. Revit is quite popular. You can create BIM models with AutoCAD. Sorry, right? AutoCAD as well, right? As long as the information is there, okay, right? We typically then do the validation part using a tool called Navisworks or model coordination in the cloud. The exchange part is a common data environment. It's a folder, I'll talk about it in a moment. It's a platform where you create a way of sharing information, reviewing, authorizing it, etc., right? Okay, and then obviously you've got your viewers, approvals, etc., right? So every BIM success and every BIM failure happens somewhere in this line, like what I've been mentioning all along. Okay, right. I'm just conscious of time. I'm sorry to get to this quickly. Right, so I've been mentioning a CDE. CDE is a common data environment, okay? Right, typically we use what we call Autodesk Forma, right? And it's not just a Google Drive or a SharePoint, right? For you to have a successful CDE, right, you need to have these 4 key stages in place, right? A CD should allow you basically to have a space, a work in progress space. This space is a space typically for the task team or for the consultant. So an architect will have a work in progress folder in the common data environment where they do their day-to-day work internally as an office, okay? And second stage of that, once they've done that, if you know, back in the days, we used to share information through an FTP site or an email, right? In this common data environment, you'll have a shared folder or a shared function where you're able to verify, review information, and share it for everyone else to consume, okay? Right? And then from there, you've got a published space where information is already reviewed, approved, and authorized for a defined use. It could either be for tender, for information, or for construction. Okay, there's a whole lot of other use cases that you could find on the platform. Right, and then obviously you should be able to archive and keep full revision history on your common data environment. Okay, does that make sense? Right. If you get into a project and a consultant says you're delivering BIM and you have to upload information to a Google Drive, ask if you can do any of these things. Okay, right. Then you know if you're working in a BIM platform, right? So what this allows us, it makes us work in a space that's purpose-defined. It's got reviews that are recorded. It's got statuses that are controlled, information that is authorized, revisions that are managed, and history that is retained. Okay, does that make sense? Right. Okay. And the framework, I just skipped a slide just because of time, but the framework that manages this, I don't know if you guys have heard of ISO 19650. Have you guys heard of ISO 19650? Right. So ISO 19650 has been adopted by South Africa as well. Right. A lot of work has been done by the community to make it relevant for our region as well. Right. So if you go into SABS, you'll see there's a SANS 19650 Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3 in motion. Okay. 3 is there already. Okay, right. This guides the industry and us on how to deliver information, right? So it's all nice and fair to talk about common data environments, who needs to make decisions, who needs what information, but there needs to be a standard that controls that, right? And what this helps us with is basically at the delivery phase of that information all the way through over to operational, right? So these are the 6 parts that we have: the concept and principles, delivery phase of assets, operational phase of assets, information exchange, and the security part and the health and safety information, right? And as I mentioned, this has been adopted now in South Africa, and the standards do not prescribe software. They frame requirements, appointments, responsibilities, planning, production, review, exchange, acceptance, security, and continuity, right? And okay, that's true. I just want to explain a bit of the answer stuff, right? Okay, right. So when ISO came in, right, people initially the industry said, there's a new rule book, you need to follow a different way of working, etc., etc., etc. And if you really go in and read the 19650 standards, you'll understand how it helps us prepare to deliver better projects and better information. Right. What I always say as well, clients should also be familiar to ISO 19650. There's a gap in the market now where guys just want their asset. I'll give up the money, do the drawing, make sure it works and it operates, and we don't really look at the standards themselves. So it's our duty as well to educate the market and the industry on how we can improve the information for the portfolios and the assets that we're creating. Right. I forgot why I said this, but put this in. Right. Oh yeah, just talking about the difference. parts that impact the delivery of changing information, right? So typically in industry, what we're talking about this whole day is BIM, where we have a collaborative information space where we create asset data information in our BIM model, right? In a project, you'll have a person that will be helping manage that information, right? Controlling the standards and making sure that everybody's sticking to the rules typically, right? Ideally, on site, we should have a VDC, where's the term? Virtual design construction. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So basically, there's a BIM manager on site for the contractor, right? It's actually beautiful when you get a contractor like a WHO, so who's got someone who understands 3D models and the information that they're receiving, right? What we typically find in the industry, and there's a lot of investment, and I'm sure guys will talk about it. There's a lot of time that's spent in building up the BIM models, but we still issue out PDFs that get printed out so the guys can build the site. And what typically happens, a BIM model ends at construction phase, and then we hand over a pile of documents. I actually worked on a project. The client wanted, names again, 85,000 square meters. I'm not picking on Victoria, but there's also Victoria. Right? And the client wanted an asset model at the end of it, right? A very well-experienced operator as well. They've been around for almost 100 years, right? And what I'm about to say is nothing to do with their age, okay? But they wanted an asset model. The professional team spent years and years and years working on this 85,000 square meter model with all the information. We managed to get the subcontractors on site to get the barcodes on the equipment back into the model, okay? And we had typically a digital twin, right? The information was validated, it was checked, verified. It took almost a year to make sure that everything was accurate. At handover, the operator asked me for a year's mistake with all the PDFs and all the Revit models, etc., etc., etc. And the problem there was, remember previously, there was a BIM execution plan that everybody signed, right? They didn't read what the tender document said or the information required by the client, right? So they had already worked and carried on working on this fancy BIM model, a very beautiful building. It's won some awards, right? But my biggest problem there, yes, the client said he wants an asset information model in a BIM format, right, digitally, etc., etc. But there's just one question that was not asked in that whole project operation. No one asked the operator how they would be managing the building. What platform are they using to manage the building, right? So everyone carried on creating all this information, not knowing how they're going to integrate or hand over back to the operator, right? Facility managers, we use CAD, computer-aided drafting, building information model. For facility managers, it's computer-aided facility management tools, okay, CAFM. So if you get into a project, Clive is an operator of a building, I need to ask him, Clive, what format or what information do you need to operate your building? Or else the 3-5 years effort that we put in putting the information together goes to waste, right? And people typically go back to the historical ways of maintaining and operating a building altogether, right? Okay, cool. So in South Africa, I wonder if I should mention a few of these projects. Yeah, I've mentioned some examples, yeah? So that's a building, right? There's a building in Pretoria, right? But there's a good example of a good information model or information model handed over to a client, right? But currently, all this information is sitting in a SharePoint folder somewhere and a whole lot of folders, right? And operator, if this little equipment breaks, yeah, they can go into a digital twin, click on it, find out the details of when it was installed, who designed it, where it was bought, etc., etc. They need to scroll down, search. I don't know if you guys have ever searched on Windows to try to find a document. It's almost impossible, right? But if we set up our information properly, we'll be able to do that. And the framework is here, guys. From 2022, we've had since 19650 published, right? Okay, and unfortunately, the capability is not there yet, but we're relying on you guys to change the industry, right? Yeah, let me just round off quickly. I'm almost there. So, just to close off quickly, right? When BIM underperforms, right, there isn't clear information that's been specified, very important. There's a lot of excessive or unnecessary detail. We have poorly configured common data environments, right? You typically work on a drive or on a computer, etc. Decisions are made outside that common data environment. We haven't made decisions on how we share information or what formats we'll be using, right? I think in 2 years this will almost disappear. The industry is going to a space where we're sharing data files instead of specific native Revit files, DWGs, etc., right? There are tools currently where I can grab a SketchUp model, convert it to data, and open it up in Revit. So I think in like 5 years' time, we won't be talking about what Revit file are you using. We'll be exchanging data, right? Too much modeling, unclear responsibilities, uncontrolled revisions and statuses, weak validation, poor handover planning, and twins without operational use cases. Right. That's when BIM underperforms. Okay. Been repeating myself. Okay. Now, what makes BIM successful, right? Like I mentioned, this is what adds value to BIM. Those are the metrics that you should measure internally. Right. So what BIM actually is, BIM is a collaborative information management capability through which reliable project and asset information is defined, produced, checked, exchanged, and used to support decisions throughout the asset lifecycle. Okay, that's my definition for BIM. Okay, and your responsibility as the next generation in the industry, I'd like you guys on every project to ask what decision must be made, right? If you ask to create a render, for example, why are you creating that type of render? Right? What information is required? Who needs the information? Right? It will help you obviously prepare. When is the information required? Who is responsible for producing it? How will it be checked? Where will the approved information be found? And can it be reused in construction, handover, and operations? Right. So you're moving away from just being a user of software, right, to creating data, right, to assist the project to deliver information more accurate. Okay. Sorry. I just had some guides for you guys. I hope I'm not late. I messed it up. I loaded all the slides in. Just give me a second. I'll come back to this touch. Right. So, just a few tips quickly. Is Revit BIM, as we spoke, Revit is an authoring tool used within a BIM project, right? The capability is information management. Can BIM exist without a 3D model? Information management can govern drawings, registers, and datasets. Models are usually central, but the capability does not collapse without one. I did say that. Okay, right. Is AutoCAD part of BIM? AutoCAD is a 2D platform, as you know. A DWG issued through a governed CDE with status and revision is managed information, right? So it can be part of BIM as well. And an uncontrolled model file is not. Okay, so we typically find you log onto a project, you see a 3D model, you immediately call it a BIM model. Just because it's 3D, it doesn't mean it's BIM. But if you have an AutoCAD drawing that's controlled with statuses, it's got people responsible for information that can actually manage information better and control the project better than that 3D model that you are typically creating. Okay? Does ISO 19650 require specific software? No, obviously. Who is responsible for BIM on a project? Everyone who produces or uses information is responsible for BIM. It's not just the architect, it's not just the interior designer. Anyone who's consuming or creating that information is part of the BIM space, right? Another slide, specific slide I'm looking for here, I think will help you, but I think the skill is what I'm talking about. Oh, you gave me 5 minutes. Right. So the skills that you need to look at beyond learning Revit or learning software, right, is basically understanding information requirements, literacy, understanding the documentation that's needed in BIM delivery. And you find that in SANS 19650 part 2, right? The EIRs and stuff. Become familiar with classifications, right? We have different classifications in BIM, like unit class and master format, etc., right? And these are specific codes that are used globally to identify assets. There's a specific code for a door, for a screen, etc., right? So familiarize yourself with those classifications, right? Get into a space where you start checking information. There are tools publicly that you could use to check the BIM models, right? Instead of a visual manual check, right? Become comfortable with working on a common data environment. In the industry, people typically say, is your project in the cloud, right? It's just basically referring to, are you working on a common data environment, okay? Just to help you, just some examples, look at format data management. Right, if you go into today's website, look for format data management. That's a very popular common data environment in the industry. Okay. There are open standards for delivering BIM, right? A very popular one is IFC, right? It's an international foundation class, right? This file format can be opened by any platform, basically. Right? We've got BCF to share data, but IDS is a validation tool. Right? So if you go online and you look at ID and search for IDS data checker, right? There are tools that are available to do this. Okay. And yeah, those are my sources. I'll just leave this on the screen so you guys can take a pic of it and then you just do your research on it. Yeah.